is my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the Jane Addams College of Social Work, Dr. Creasie Finney Hairston. It was under her leadership that this memorial lecture series was established, and she will now bring greetings and introduce this year's esteemed speaker.
Good afternoon. It is certainly my pleasure as Dean of the Jane Addams College of Social Work to extend greetings and to welcome you to the Honing Lecture. The lecture was established to honor the memory of Mrs. Karen J. Honing. Mrs. Honing was a graduate of the Jane Addams College of Social Work, and at the time of her death, or shortly before, she was providing services for youth who were making the transition from living in foster care to living independently as adults. Mrs. Honing was not only a social worker, she was a teacher and a civic leader. She was a person who was loved by her family and admired and respected by her colleagues. It is certainly a pleasure for us to have the Honing Lecture for almost 30 years now. And for the entire time that we've had the lecture, a member of the Honing family has always been present. And for many years, close friends and colleagues of Mrs. Honing have been present as well. Now, the lecture today is co-sponsored with the Jane Addams Center for Social Policy and Research. And this is very befitting and becoming given the person who will be presenting, as well as the topic of the presentation or lecture. So I am definitely pleased as well as honored to introduce the speaker. The speaker today is Ms. Anjanette Young. Ms. Young is a graduate of the Jane Addams College of Social Work. And I might say she is a proud graduate and a very proud social worker. When she was a student, she specialized in the area of mental health. And since graduating, she has been providing mental health intervention services for individuals, children, and their families. Ms. Young became a staunch advocate for social reform and social justice, specifically police reform and accountability, when she became the victim of a botched police raid wherein she actually feared for her life. Ms. Young, in talking with her, she indicated to me that she thought this was her calling. In fact, she said she believed it was a part of her DNA because her grandmother, a person who was a significant person in her life when she was growing up, was an advocate for social reform and social justice, and she was an activist who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. When I was a child in church, whenever a distinguished visitor came to present, the person who was doing the introduction always said, when I said when I was a child, I mean when I was a child going to church, the person who was introducing the esteemed or distinguished minister would always say, now without further ado, I bring you Reverend whoever it was. So today for the distinguished speaker we have, I say, without further ado, I bring you Ms. Anjanette Young.
Good evening, everyone. I am very honored to be speaking tonight at this event. Karen J. Honing is a prestigious alum of Jane Addams College of Social Work, and I'm thankful to her family for creating this event in her memory. I'm thankful to Dean Hairston and all of Jane Addams staff for inviting me to be this year's speaker. During our time together this evening, I will share with you my personal experience, how the social work profession has been doing the work from the very beginning, and how social workers have always been frontline workers, the first line of defense when an individual or community has been under attack for social and racial justice. Our topic tonight social workers as the frontline workers in the pandemic of social and racial injustice. I will end our time together by encouraging you to take a self-inventory of where you are, where we are as a society and country, and ask you to find ways to use your voice because the time is right for social workers. So let's talk about how did I get here? I've been practicing in the field of social work for over 25 years as a direct practice social worker on the macro level, working with children and families of different populations, such as child welfare, foster care, domestic violence, HIV, and parenting team in the housing community, in my most recent position as a medical social worker. I've never had a desire to work as in a macro setting, doing justice, social justice, policy, and legislative work. All of that is part of social work, but macro has a more social justice focus in changing large systemic systems. Next slide. So during our time together tonight, we'll talk about how did I get here, social justice and social workers, and how we all can take action in this time. Next slide. On this slide, you'll see an image of me. This is where in 2019, my home was raided by the Chicago Police Department raid team. It was the wrong raid. They had the wrong house, wrong information. I want to show you guys a few minutes of this clip and give you a disclaimer that this could be harmful and traumatic to watch. So please, be mindful and take care of yourself as we play this video. Play the video, please.
Home from work. And while I was undressing in my bedroom.
It was a cold February night, and Anjanette Young, a social worker, had just finished her shift at the hospital.
You see them running up to the apartment complex with the battering ram in their hand, a crowbar. It was so traumatic to hear the way the thing was hitting the door. And it happened so fast, I didn't have time to put on clothes.
And suddenly, she found herself frozen in fear, completely naked, in a room full of men. 9 body cameras rolling.
And you're just standing there.
And I'm just standing there. I mean, terrified, humiliated, not even understanding why in that moment that this is happening to me.
And the first thing police reach for is not clothing, it's handcuffs.
There were big guns and guns with lights and scopes on them, and they were yelling at me, put your hands up, put your hands up.
What are you thinking right now?
I just remember, being so afraid. It's one of those moments where I just felt like that I could have died that night. If I had made one wrong move, I felt like they would have shot me.
In this next slide, we see here where it says, my name is Anjanette Young. I put this here because during the raid, the police officers didn't even know my name. And so it goes to show that they didn't spend any time, getting the information correct. The information that they were given was from a confident informant, which had given them bad information. And so when officers don't do the front work to show that they actually have the right place, then that's a huge systemic issue. And it shows disregard to the Black and brown communities, that there's no value in the work, or there's no value in them doing the work correctly in a way that causes the least amount of harm. And research and data has shown that here in the city of Chicago, and I'm sure probably across the country, that these type of raids or these type of wrong raids primarily happen in the Black and brown communities. Next slide, please. So here I talk about definitions: frontline workers, pandemic, social injustices, and racial injustices. The reason, let's dive a little deeper into these words. Frontline worker. Frontline worker frontline is a military term. When there is a war, the military builds a strong front line of defense and in a frontline defense to fight. In the online Collins Dictionary, a frontline worker is someone who is in front, who plays a very important part in the defense against the enemy. In this case, our enemy is the pandemic of social and racial injustices. Pandemic. A pandemic is described as an outbreak of a disease that occurs over a wide geographic area, typically affects significant portions of a population. In this context, our pandemic that we're fighting is social and racial injustices. So what are social injustices? Social injustices are defined as a lack of human rights, a lack of human dignity that manifests in individuals' daily lives. Some examples of social injustices are discrimination against an individual or a community based on their race, age, or gender. Another social injustice could be unfair labor practices, healthcare inequality, food insecurities in poor neighborhoods or food deserts. We know that we have quite a few communities here in Chicago who experience food deserts. Lack of quality public school in the area of poor and low-income families. And we know our CPS system here has a lot of work to be done. And unfair criminal laws that give harsher sentences to certain groups than others. What are racial injustices? Racial injustice can be defined as an imbalance of power related to disparities in wealth, public resources, such as housing of government assistance. The reason that those four words are important, or I wanted to point them out during this time today, is because I want to show the connection between those four words and what social workers do and what social workers have been doing from the beginning of time. The mission of social work is to enhance the human well-being and to meet the basic needs of all people, with particular attention to those in need, people who need, particularly those in need and vulnerable in oppression and living in poverty. Some of the core values of social work is service, social justice, dignity and worth of a person, importance of human relationships, integrity and competency. Now, when individuals and families are experiencing a pandemic, whether it's a health pandemic or whether it's a social or a racial pandemic, social workers are often the first line of defense. We're usually the first ones that people are going to talk about things that are going on. We're usually the first ones that people are referred to when there's a need for some type of service or some type of resource in the community. Social workers have always been right there from the very beginning. Next slide, please. Now, historically, social workers have been on the front lines in America's fight against social and racial injustice since the 1900s. And so starting as far back as Jim Crow and moving all the way to current day with Black Lives Matter, what Stacey Abrams is fighting for with fraud against voters' rights in Georgia. And then most recently, the awful way that Ketanji Jackson was treated during her confirmation hearing. Now, also other social workers who have been doing the work, our famous Jane Addams, who was a frontline worker for the settlement movement. She was the co-founder of the Chicago HUD House and other HUD houses here around America and on our campus right here in Chicago. We have Dorothy Height. It was a frontline and a key worker in school desegregation and voting right opportunities. Oftentimes she's known as the grandmother of the movement or the godmother of the movement. And then we have our own NSAW president, Mitt Joyner, who is very involved in this fight. She co-authored Critical Multicultural Social Work, Persons Living with HIV and AIDS in Kenya. And then all of you. Next slide. All of you here, we may work in different roles, but we all can be frontline workers. So with social work, we have a voice that we can use in many populations or many arenas. We have social workers in child welfare. We have social workers in school social work, the social workers in the justice system, advocacy and community, working with the elderly population, medical social workers that doing research, policy, and planning. We all can use our voice to be change makers. Next slide, please. So when you look at this slide right here, it's the visual shows the difference between what I would call Black America and white America, and what the imbalance have often been historically over the years, and what the imbalances have been historically over the years. And what I like about this visual is that I put social workers right in the middle. In social workers, we don't have to choose which side of the aisle that we want to be on, or which side of justice do we want to be on. If we would just follow if we follow the practices and the policies, and we follow the principles of social work, then we don't have to choose sides, because social work tells us that if we just follow those principles of serving people with dignity and worth, then we don't have to decide whether it's right or wrong, or if it's Black or white, to be able to serve those people. Next slide, please. I believe that oftentimes as individuals, we struggle when to use our voices in these arenas. The issue is that we're fighting for, when to use our voices for the issues that we're fighting for. And personally, I found that when we speak up as social workers, then we don't have to choose sides, we just follow the core principles. That's exactly what I did in 2019. And it's also what another social worker who found himself as the jury foreman of the Ahmaud Arbery trial, that he spoke up as well. And so you will find that without even realizing it, that you will find social workers in many arenas. No one knew initially when he was chosen to be the jury foreman that he was a social worker. But because he was a social worker, he used that as a platform also to do the right thing. And so this year's theme with social work is the time is right. The time is right now for social workers to step up and use their voices in whatever area or whatever arena that we find ourselves in to do the right thing. Next slide. The future is what we make it. Injustices at anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. And so we've all heard that famous saying from Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think that we can all use that as a platform to push us forward, to make sure that we are finding our ways to self-reflect and use our voice for justice. Next slide, please. The who, how, and what. How can we take action? So as I mentioned earlier, each of you or each of us can use whatever arena that we're in, whatever situation that we find ourselves in, whatever population that we're serving, as a way to use our voices. Do a self-reflection, find out what works for you, but find ways to use your voice. When my home was raided in 2019, I made a conscious decision that I wanted to fight back against what had happened to me. And it just so happened that I have my social work background to utilize in a way to speak up and to take action. And I know that many families here in the city of Chicago have had similar experiences as myself, but not always feel comfortable to speak up or feel strong enough to speak up. It's not easy to take your most vulnerable situations, such as the video that I shared with you guys. It's not easy to make a decision to take your most vulnerable situation and expose yourself to the public in effort to expose a larger or a greater corrupt system, which is what I did when I took on the city of Chicago in the police department for what they had done to me. So ways that you can get involved. If you're not a registered voter, please register to vote. And especially in your local elections. Our local elections really inform a lot of our day-to-day living, right? The police officer that pulls you over gives you a ticket and you go before a judge. You voted for that judge. The night that they raided my home, someone had to sign off on a warrant. That was a judge. Now, someone voted for that judge. Your senators, your aldermen who are responsible for your everyday living in your community. If your trash get picked up, if your street get plowed when the snow is more than 2 feet. All of those things come from your local elections. So if you're not a registered voter, I encourage you, please get registered to vote. That's one way that you can get involved. Another way to get involved is as a social worker, be a part of Advocacy Day when NSAW and our local chapters are fighting for rights for not only for us personally, but for all of the families that we're working with. Those are ways that you can get involved. Next slide, please. Ways to stay connected with me. Next slide, please. I'm on all of the social media platforms. Anjanette Young at Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you would like to reach out to me to talk more about the work that I'm doing here in the city of Chicago, or even just have a conversation of how you as a social worker can be more involved. Maybe, having a conversation about you're not sure how you can use your voice in your space. I'm open to having those type of conversations with anyone who reaches out to me. Next slide. I want to thank everyone this evening from listening to me and being here tonight for such an amazing opportunity for me to share my story with you guys, to share and encourage you to be more involved and use your voice in social work. And now I will turn it over to Q&A.
Thank you, Ms. Young, very much. So again, as Dr. Holden said in the beginning, we want you to enter your questions in the Q&A section. And then I'll convey those questions to Ms. Young. Okay, Ms. Young, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so the first question is, I am curious about who reached out to you after the incident. How did you raise public awareness about the injustice that happened to you? And she also thanks you for sharing your story with us.
So no one reached out to me after the incident. And I'm assuming that maybe you're asking that as it relates to if anyone from the city of Chicago, the mayor's office, or the police department. There was no one who reached out to me after the incident happened. And that's part of the systemic issue, because even the night when the officers left my home, and they left my home in disarray, one of the things that is supposed to happen when when they found out that they had a wrong raid, when they found out they raided the wrong house, one of the things that's supposed to happen is they're supposed to send someone to repair my door, because of course they broke the door. And then there's supposed to be someone from the city's victim service department or program to reach out to me. None of that happened in my particular case. And the awareness came because I immediately hired an attorney, and my attorney began to start the legal process of what it would take for us to address this issue with the city. And the unfortunate piece is the city chose to not address me, and the city chose to hide behind the incident. They did as much as they could to hide the incident. So if for those of you who are seeing the original video didn't come out until December of 2020. And that's because with my legal process, the city denied everything that my attorney was attempting to do to address the issue. And so it took us almost 13 months before we were even allowed to have the body cam footage. which is, you know, just goes to show how much corruption there is in the city of Chicago around issues such as this.
Thank you. So the next question is, and I'm combining two questions. Can you tell us a little about your current work and about your nonprofit?
So currently, I have a consulting company called Cafe Social Work Consulting. And what that came about actually in the same year, it came in March of 2019. I was already planning and doing the work to start my business right in the midst of when this raid happened. And one of the things that I felt strongly about is I wasn't going to allow that situation to prevent me from reaching my goals that I had set for starting my business. So I started my business a few weeks after the incident happened, maybe 5 or 6 weeks after the incident happened. And it was a struggle to keep going after having that type of experience. But the foundation of my company, or why I'm doing, or why I started Cafe Social Work, it really was about helping and mentoring new social workers, to give them support and coaching as it relates to what it means to be a social worker, helping them as it relates to licensing exams, how to start that process, how to get tutoring. I provide clinical supervision hours for that. But it was so important for me to continue to do that, because if I was gonna start my business, which was primarily about helping new social workers, I really felt strongly that as a social worker, I had to push forward and really, you know, be the person that I wanted to be as it relates to starting my business. And I couldn't allow this situation with the city to derail me from that.
Okay, the next question is, can you talk about your experience after the fact, making your complaint about the police, and about how social work helped you?
I think so. Social work, from that particular night of the incident, the media took on the fact that I was a social worker, and they highlighted that in their narrative. It was not, you know, was not my initial thing to say, hey, I'm a social worker, this happened to me. The media took on the narrative that this is a social worker, someone who goes to work every day to serve the public, to help others, and this happened to her. So that's how the narrative of me being a social worker became public during this situation. But then I just used that as a way to speak more to the systemic issue that was at hand. So yes, I'm a social worker, and if it happened to me, then and I have experienced this, it could pretty much happen to anyone here in the city of Chicago. And I also thought about all the other families that this happened to that did not have the type of background or foundation that I had to be able to deal with these type of experiences, deal with the trauma. As a social worker, because as social workers, we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. Self-care is an important thing for us. I was already connected with a therapist before this incident happened. So when this incident happened for me, I was able to reach out to my current therapist and say, hey, this happened, I really need to meet with you. But knowing that other families don't always have a direct connection to therapy, or even know that therapy is the way to go in order to deal with the trauma that they're experiencing. And then some of the systemic issues around accessing therapy. For someone who's not connected to therapy, the process of identifying a therapist, a process of finding a therapist that will accept your insurance, and understanding that process, that's a difficult process to navigate for just the everyday person who may feel like I need to, have therapy to address my trauma. And then also for me, as my social work background, understanding trauma in the way that I understood it from a professional aspect also gave me more insight on how to take care of myself. I understood my triggers, I understood what my body was feeling, and I knew how to avoid certain things that were going to also be triggers for me. And I know that that's not always the case for just the everyday person that experienced some type of trauma.
Thank you. So the next question begins with a statement. Thank you so much for your powerful testimony. Are anything being done from a policy standpoint to prevent what happened to you from happening to others? And if so, are there ways for us to get involved?
So absolutely there is. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that NSAW, both the national chapter, Midjourner, allowed me an opportunity to speak on a national platform with her to talk about this issue. And then NSAW, the Illinois chapter, has partnered with me on a policy that that's called the Anjanette Young Ordinance. And what that ordinance is, it would be legislation that would be put in place that would hold police officers more accountable for their actions in situations such as mine. So the things that the Anjanette Young Ordinance is asking for is that we're asking that police officers do upfront work as it relates to getting a warrant to raid someone's home. Because to raid someone's home, there's a process. They have to submit, a application, and then there's a sergeant that has to sign off on it. And then when the sergeant signs off on it, then it goes in front of a judge. And the judge generally has someone to testify to the facts that are in the warrant. And then that warrant is signed by a judge, and then the raid is conducted. And so all of those things happen in my situation, but they happen with false information. The police officer that submitted the application to be signed by his sergeant used information from a confidential informant, someone who was given information in effort to not get arrested for the thing that they had been picked up for. And so they gave information about my home that was not true. And where the systemic issue is, or where the downfall is, when the sergeant got that information from the confidential informant, he did not do the next step, which was to investigate my home and my location to ensure the information that he had gotten from the confidential informant was true. He did not do that. He just took it straight to a judge and had the informant to tell the judge that, yes, this information is accurate, and the judge signed off on the warrant. So the system failed in a lot of areas. Confidential informants being paid to give false information that isn't fact checked, and then the sergeant signing off on it without doing some fact checking, and then the judge signing off on it just believing what a confidential informant said, which this is an individual that is saying what is needed so that he doesn't get arrested. So there are a lot of areas where the system failed. And so with the Anjanette Young Ordinance, we're asking for those things to be put in place. We're asking that a higher level officer from the police department must fact check the information, that they can't get warrants just solely from a confidential informant. We're asking that they don't, when they do raids, that they know who's in the home. So like I said before, they didn't know my name. And so they didn't even know who home they were going into. So they must do the upfront work to know whose home it is and who's in the home. And so on other raids, we know that there have been children in the home, and where they've pointed guns at children and where they've put children in handcuffs. So the Anjanette Young Ordinance is asking that they don't point guns at children and that they don't put children in handcuffs. You would think that that would be very common sense, that you wouldn't do that, but we have to ask for those things in the Anjanette Young Ordinance. And then it just asks for basic transparency, that when someone is the victim of any type of police interaction, that the person is given a report or copies of the video within 48 hours of the incident. That didn't happen with me. We had to fight 13 months just to get copies of the body cam footage from the night that my incident happened. So the Anjanette Young Ordinance is asking that the city of Chicago put these things in place so that there is a better chance that what happened to me doesn't continue to happen in the Black and brown communities. Now, what can you do right now? We are fighting for this ordinance, and things that people can do to help is, if you live in the city of Chicago, reach out to your alderman and tell your alderman that you support Anjanette Young and that you want them to vote the Anjanette Young ordinance into law. There are 52 people on the city council. We need what is called a simple majority for this to become law, which means we need somewhere between 26, 28 aldermen to vote yes to this. Right now, we have 21 aldermen who have publicly said, yes, I will vote for this. So we still need additional votes for this to pass. So if you live in the city of Chicago, you could call your alderman, you could send your alderman an email and say, I think this is important and that you should vote for this. Those are the policy changes that we're currently putting in, we're putting out there as in policy changes. And then the next step is we are trying to get that legislation passed in Chicago. And then once it's passed in Chicago, then we will move to Springfield as a step 2 to get it passed for the state of Illinois.
Thank you. Next question, for someone who is not a social worker, but looking to get involved with their community and possibly become a social worker, would you have any suggestions?
Absolutely. So you don't have to be a social worker to fight for change. So fighting for a change or getting involved just means, first of all, make sure you're a registered voter and make sure you're voting on your local level and, state and national level. Get out and vote. Your vote matters. All of our votes matter. So that's the first thing you could do. You could find organizations in the community that you can volunteer for. If you want to volunteer and get involved in some of those things, you can follow my social media pages. When I have events, I post them on my social media. This past Saturday, we had a rally in downtown Chicago at Daily Plaza where we were asking the mayor in the city to support the Anjanette Young ordinance. And then as it relates to becoming a social worker, so there's a process to social work, and the first process is education. So you would need to get that social work degree if you want to be a social worker. And that could start with the bachelor level degree, moving on to master's level, licensure, PhD. There's a whole track that you can follow as it relates to becoming a social worker. I mentor individuals who are currently social workers and individuals who are thinking about becoming social workers. So you could reach out to me at my website, which is cafesocialwork.com, and you can send me information and I will make time to speak with you as it relates to what your journey would look like to become a social worker.
Okay, thank you. What is your relationship with the Chicago Police Department now?
I don't have one. I say that in the sense that I've not had any direct contact, interaction, or communications with the City of Chicago Police Department. Part of that is because once I hired my attorney, legally, I had to step back and allow him to speak for me, but I can tell you that he's had very little contact with them as well. Superintendent David Brown, I can recall one interview that he did with the media where he mentioned my situation, but he has never said anything directly related to me or my attorney as it relates to this case. And that's really shameful because I had a personal meeting with the mayor and we talked about ways to make changes. We talked about ways that we could partner together. I left that meeting hopeful that we could do some work in the city of Chicago together, but unfortunately that meeting was very perfunctory for the mayor. She came, she sat, she listened, she said a lot of things, but she did none of the things that she mentioned in that meeting. So I don't have a relationship with them at all at this point.
Okay, next question is, what do you think can be done to help officers to see the humanity in people? Should there be more officers who are from the communities they serve?
So unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to change how officers view individuals. If you don't come to the job with a view of human decency, for every person that you interact. When you sign up and you wear that uniform that says to protect and serve, there should be a level of human decency that comes with you. It's the same with social work. When you become a social worker, there's a level of human decency that you bring to the job. And then the training and the education enhances that basic level that you come with. So if officers don't come with that level of basic human decency, it's really hard to train someone to do that. It's one of those things where you say, you can come to the job with the right attitude and personality, then I can train you to do the work. And so I believe that's to be the same with police officers. They need to come to the job with a level of human decency. On that evening, when those officers stood in my home and not even to see or address me as a human, or as a woman, they didn't even see. So they didn't see me as human, my words. And I say that because as a man, when you come into a situation as a police officer, it's one thing to have bad information that led them to my door. I get mistakes happen, so they got bad information. They didn't do the work, so they ended up at the wrong door. Where things could have gone different is once they got on the other side of that door and they saw a undressed woman, they should have acted differently. Had they interacted with me differently once on the other side of my door, this situation would look a whole lot different. They didn't see me as anyone that deserved any respect or value. They could not see their mothers, their sisters, their daughters, their neighbors. They could not see a woman that they cared about in the position that I was standing in. And if they don't come with that level of decency when they come to the job, it's very hard to train them to get to that point.
The next question is, how did you control your anger during the incident, considering the humiliation you endured?
I don't know that I controlled my anger. I was afraid to do anything other than what they were saying to me. So when they burst into my home and they came guns a-blazing, so there were 12 officers inside of my home and they all had guns, long assault rifle guns with scopes and lights, and they're pointing them at me and they're yelling at me, put your hands up. At that point, I feared for my life. So I was not in a position to be angry. I was in a position that I was praying that they would not kill me. We know the narrative. Breonna Taylor happened a few months after mine, but even so, we know that when officers pull guns, that not always do the Black and brown person walk away from that situation. So I stood there in fear. And so there was no way to control my anger. And if you go back and watch some of the other videos where you watch the entire video, there are times that I am yelling back at them because I'm so angry. I'm so angry at how they're treating me. I'm angry because they would not tell me why they were in my home. They would not tell me who they were looking for. And they never spoke directly to me until they were done doing what they were doing. And so I'm yelling, I'm crying, I'm pleading for them to tell me what is going on. And they ignored me. There was a level of invisibility. I was invisible to them. They entered my home, they had a job to do, and me standing there undressed was not a factor for them.
Okay. Ms. Young, how you doing? You okay?
I'm good.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm combining a question here. As it relates to police reform, do you think there can be partnerships with police and social workers?
I do think that there can be partnership with police and social workers. So my personal views is that having a social worker that goes on a call with a police officer, I don't believe that that's the best method because when police respond to situations, they induce chaos. They induce chaos. The mere fact of coming to a scene with loud lights and loud, lights and loud sirens induces chaos. When they get out of the car and they pull their weapon, that induces chaos. That's the way they're trained to respond to situations. And so unfortunately, when it comes to some mental health crises, some domestic violence crises, police officers aren't the best trained person to respond to that, because if someone in a mental health crisis will not respond well to yelling and chaos, and sometimes even lights are triggering for them, and then pointing a gun and yelling at them will not help the situation either. I think what is better suited as in a partnership would be where police officers, where when there is a crisis that, a social worker or a mental health counselor is asked to respond, police officers can be in the background for safety, but that social worker or that counselor may be the first one to interact with that person in effort to bring down the chaos, because we are trained to interact with people in a way where we can help them, where we can help de-escalate the situation and then find out what is the reason that the situation happened. And police officers aren't trained that way.
How is your relationship now with the mayor of Chicago?
I don't have a relationship with her either. I did have one personal sit-down meeting with her where it was just she and I, her, the city's attorney, and my attorney. And we had this at my church, and my pastor was the mediator. And we had that meeting right after, in December, right after the body cam footage came out. So maybe like a week later, she met with us and we sat down and had a one-on-one. And unfortunately, the things that were said in that meeting never happened. And the mayor, I don't believe she really had any real intentions on rectifying what happened to me. And in some off-camera conversations from people who have shared things with me, the mayor really didn't feel like it was her responsibility to my situation, because it happened before she took office. It happened in that transition period. My situation happened in February. The mayor took office in April. So it happened in a transition of two mayors. And so she really doesn't feel like it's her, that fell on her as to resolve that matter.
Okay. The next question is, how do we pull together as social workers? What I have seen is that we as social workers are great advocates on a micro level. However, in the macro space, I don't see social workers leading the efforts. What are your suggestions to pull together on a macro level? Where do we start?
So I think I'm really hoping that this year's theme, the time is right for social workers. I'm hoping that social workers take that theme and we run with it for the entire year. Let's not just stop in the month of March, right? So social workers have a unique opportunity to speak in spaces and not have to get caught up in the political arena. So that slide that I showed about the scales of justice and social workers being right in the middle is because we don't have to choose sides. If we just operate in the social work principles, it doesn't matter which side of the scale that people are on, just treat people with human dignity. And I think we have a unique opportunity to speak up just in whatever space we're in. So when you hear microaggressions in your workplace, speak up and don't be afraid to use your voice. And if a lot of times people don't use their voice for fear of retribution or fear of not being liked or for whatever reason. But as social workers, if we just operate in our social work principles, it's not even about, if, I'm Democrat or Republican, just be a social worker. And then in that framework, you can, when you hear microaggression in your workplace, which means you're a social worker, that's a social service or some type of social work setting, refer back to the code of ethics, use what you have. It doesn't necessarily, if you're not comfortable or strong to use your own voice, use the voice of social work. Say the code of ethics says that that's not okay. or social work principles doesn't align with that statement that you just said. Those are ways that you can use just your profession as a social worker to begin to use your voice. And then there are spaces in advocacy that social work is doing. The NSAW is doing some great things. NSAW Illinois is doing some great things. So we need to get involved. And so in getting involved, meaning showing up and speaking up and bringing a friend along with you. A lot can happen when you have large numbers. If Black Lives Matters can fill the streets of Chicago when something happens, social workers can too. There's enough of us here that if we just make the choice and the decision to be involved, we can make things happen. And so our theme this year could not be a better one. The time is right for social workers. Step up, use your voice.
Regarding the response from the city of Chicago, what do you think would have happened had you not retained an attorney?
I believe had I not retained an attorney, that my case would have been swept under the rug. Because with an attorney, it took me 13 months to get any type of interaction from the city, 13 months to get the body cam footage, and 13 months to even for the city to acknowledge me. And they only acknowledged me after the videos were released. And mind you that the videos were released from a decision that my attorney and I made, and which could have really gotten him in trouble as an attorney, because he received the body cam footage in federal court, and the federal judge said, you can only use this for this. But our legal maneuvers, we got the information we needed from federal court, and then we closed the federal case. We dismissed the federal case, so we're not going forward with this. Now we had the information to do what we felt we wanted to do with it. And then when we did release it, the city filed a suit against my attorney and myself. They wanted sanctions against us for showing the body cam footage. That's what I mean by we live in such a corrupt system here in the city of Chicago, where a woman like myself, who has been exposed and traumatized in this way by the hand of the police department, and then the city law department decides to take me to court and say that I'm wrong for using information about my own person.
Okay, thank you. And I thank everyone for their questions. Just because of time, we're gonna submit 2 more questions to Ms. Young. And the first of the last is, where are you in your healing journey?
So it has been a journey. I would definitely say, so this has been 3 years now, 3.5 years since this incident happened. And it's been a journey. I have been diagnosed with PTSD and major depression. I was off work for 10 months on medical leave because I just literally could not function most days. And I would say that I'm better now. I just went back to work 2 weeks ago. And I would say what has helped me is 1, my therapist, 2, my faith in God, 3, the support that I've gotten from my senior pastor in my church, Progressive Baptist Church, here in Chicago, 37 in Wentworth. If you're looking for a church, a little shameless plug there. But they have been so supportive to me. When I say that my church has been so supportive to me, is when I started this process, and when I was being asked to do media interviews and things of that nature, I did not want anyone coming into my home. So you can imagine, after your home being invaded the way my home was invaded, that I never wanted anyone coming into my home again. And so when I didn't want to do interviews in my home, and I didn't want to give people my home address, my church was there for me. Initially, every interview I did in my church, inside my church. And then when people wanted to support me and say, oh, can we send you something? Can I send you a card? I use my church address as a place for people to send things. This is how much my church supported me in this process. when we met with the mayor, we met at my church with my pastor. These things are huge as it relates to having the support that you need to heal. And I know my situation is unique, as in not everyone who has my experience has this type of support, but it has been enormous part of my healing journey. And I tell people all the time, because I was angry for a really long time. And so how did I deal with the anger? It was both from spiritual guidance and my therapist. My therapist was working with me on acceptance. You have to accept that this happened and find a way. Once you find a way to accept it, then you can find a way to move forward. And then my pastor in my church was saying, you have to forgive. And once you find a way to forgive, then you can be on the other side of healing. And it took me almost 2 years to work those two processes to get to a point of where I am today. And I can definitely say that there are times that I'm still angry, but I've learned how to move forward from it.
Okay, thank you. Last question. Do you see Chicago making progress towards defunding the police?
So I don't know if I personally necessarily agree with defunding the police, because at the core of our society, there is a need for policing. Chicago does not do it well, but there is a need for it. I don't think that we can live in a society where we don't have police doing their job. They need to do it better, but they do. So I don't necessarily agree with defund the police, but I do believe that the city of Chicago could do better with decreasing the police budget and increasing social services, mental health, domestic violence, and all of those things that are social issues to help in the community. If we can increase budgets and increase resources for families and communities, then that would help to offset some of the things that the police are experiencing. The police are not trained to respond to social issues. And so there needs to be a nice balance of, budget and funding and resources for social issues. And then also there is, a need for policing at certain degrees.
Thank you. And again, I thank everyone for their questions. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to them all. I think we all benefited from Ms. Young's answers. Dr. Hairston, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Strickland. And I don't even know what to say, that would be really appropriate for thanking Ms. Young for such a powerful testimony and for really sharing with us her experiences and what she did following something that was really just horrific that we never want to experience ourselves. So this has been just a wonderful evening to hear not only what happened, but also the challenge as to what we can do individually and collectively. I also want to thank the Honig family, particularly Dr. George Honig, for sponsoring this lecture series and for the ongoing support that he and the family have provided for us for now almost 30 years. Certainly, much thanks to Dr. Joseph Strickland for fielding those questions, for all of you who put questions, in the question and answer box, but also for the messages that you had in the chat, many of them indicating how much you appreciated Ms. Young sharing with us her experiences. And I cannot leave without thanking the Jane Addams team that does the work behind the scene. Candace Stokely, Brian Tibbs, Byron Samuels, Therese Molina. They're the people who make sure that things like this work the way they're supposed to. So many thanks to all of you who participated, and we look forward to seeing you at other college events. And perhaps in the near future, we will actually see each other. Thank you all very much.